last month, President Biden made an historic investment in our future by signing the CHIPS and Science Act into law. So in addition to boosting federal funding for scientific research, yay, the law provides $52 billion in subsidies to revitalize our domestic semiconductor manufacturing industry. Now, semiconductor chips are critical ingredients for everything from cell phones to cars. So this is a very important investment to strengthen our supply chains, create good union jobs, and bring down prices for consumers. But to ensure that corporations exclusively use CHIPS funds for these purposes, rather than simply for boosting their own profits, Congress put guardrails up. And one of these guardrails prohibits semiconductor manufacturers from using CHIPS funds for buying back their own stock. Stock buybacks mainly serve to manipulate share prices and boost corporate executives' profits, money that could instead be used to build a factory or hire workers or invest in worker training. So, Dr. Bowerly-Dansman, you're an expert on investment in critical sectors like semiconductors. So let me just ask you, the CHIPS and Science Act clearly prohibits chip manufacturers like Intel or IBM from using CHIPS funds to conduct stock buybacks. But could Intel or IBM accept CHIPS funds and then use its own money for stock buybacks?
Possibly.
All right, so here's the issue. If Intel is awarded CHIPS funds, it is required to use those funds to fulfill the purposes of the CHIPS program. I totally get this, but money is money. Money is fungible. By taking CHIPS funds, Intel would have more money, which might free up other funds that it could then use for stock buybacks. You know, this is not a hypothetical risk. Between 2011 and 2020, 5 of the largest semiconductor companies, Intel, IBM, Qualcomm, Texas Instrument, and Broadcom, all of which heavily lobbied for the CHIPS Act, spent $250 billion, or 70% of their collective profits, 5 times more than we put into the CHIPS Act, on what? On stock buybacks. Just a few weeks ago, Texas Instruments authorized a new $15 billion stock buyback program. Now, Secretary Raimondo says CHIPS funds won't be used for buybacks on her watch, period. Commerce said CHIPS money is not, quote, a subsidy for companies to make them more profitable or enable them to have more cash for stock buybacks or to pad their bottom lines, end quote. So, Dr. Bowerly-Dansman, why is it important that the Commerce Department lives up to its promises that taxpayer funds in the CHIPS programs aren't used directly or indirectly to fund stock buybacks or other shareholder payouts?
Thank you for the question. It's important. When you're designing these sorts of subsidy programs, it's important to get the balance right because you want the companies to actually take the funds and to expand production, which is good for national security and good for American workers. That said, taxpayers are investing billions of dollars in the semiconductor manufacturing industry on the basis of 2 things, right? The U.S. will be physically safer and more economically resilient if we build back more of this capacity, and that reshoring is not commercially viable without government support. And so if we see a lot of stock buybacks, this is going to undermine the U.S. public support for these sorts of programs. And that will make it harder to appropriate such funds in the future, as well as if we're not expanding domestic production as much as we should, that could have national security consequences.
So thank you very much. I mean, you've got a lot of points in there about why it is important that the money we invest means that the companies are spending money on reinvesting and not on something like stock buybacks. How do we get there? That means tougher rules like requiring companies on the application to attest that they will not engage in stock buybacks, by giving additional preferences to companies that commit to longer buyback moratoria, by clawing back funds from companies that go back on their word. So I'm looking forward to working with Secretary Raimondo and my colleagues to ensure that this critical investment onshores our supply chain, creates those good union jobs, lowers prices for families, and powers our economy into the future in ways we intended, rather than helps line the pockets of the CEOs of these giant corporations. I appreciate your work in this area and hope we can work together to get this done. Thank you.